Growing up in my family, art was just a phase you were supposed to grow out of. If I came home with a sketch, it got taped to the fridge, but only until my brother's math test came in. Then it got replaced. No conversation, no warning. Just, draw something useful next time. Dad would laugh, ruffling my hair like I was a 5-year-old with a crayon. But I wasn't 5. I was 16, and drawing wasn't something I did. It was who I was. My mother used to say, "It's sweet that you like to doodle, honey, but let's be real. How are you going to pay rent with that?" And when I tried to explain about art schools, scholarships, galleries, they laughed. You think someone's going to hang your little drawings in a museum. You'll end up working in a coffee shop, watching your friends get real jobs. Those friends were mostly my brother, Kevin, who my parents treated like a future CEO. He was getting a business degree. He wore a suit to Thanksgiving dinner. I wore paint on my sleeves. He got praise. I got pats on the head. By senior year, I stopped showing them my sketchbooks. I started drawing at night under a lamp in the attic after they thought I was asleep. That little attic became the only place I felt free. It smelled like dust and old furniture. But to me, it smelled like possibility. Every sketch I made was a secret, every painting a quiet rebellion. But the worst part wasn't the teasing. It was how small they made me feel, like every time I picked up a pencil I was wasting oxygen, like passion was a weakness. When I finally told them I'd applied to art school on a full scholarship, I expected shock. I got mockery. Dad chuckled and said, "What? They needed someone to draw posters?" Mom didn't even look up from her tablet. "You'll regret it when the bills come." Kevin chimed in. "Better start practicing 'Do you want oat milk' with that now." I laughed with them, because crying would have made it worse. I moved out that fall. Tiny apartment. Tiny budget. Huge dreams. I worked 2 jobs, took on freelance commissions, ate a lot of ramen noodles. But I never felt more myself. Each class pushed me deeper into the fire of who I was. We had to paint emotion, memory, pain, and suddenly, everything I'd been through, every cruel joke, every time they said real jobs only, every little dig became color on canvas. I didn't have to scream, I just painted. One night in sophomore year, I started something new. Something I didn't show my professor. I called it the dinner table. It was my family, sitting around, smiling, talking, laughing. Except in the painting, they had no faces, just mouths. Wide, grinning, sharp. No eyes, no ears. Because they didn't see me. And they never listened. I didn't think I'd show it to anyone. But then I got accepted into an emerging artist showcase. They wanted 4 pieces. And without thinking too hard, I included the dinner table. The night of the show, I sent them an invite. I didn't expect them to come. But they did. Dad in his work jacket, Mom in a stiff smile, Kevin with his arm around his new fiancée. They walked through the gallery like tourists at a zoo, until they reached my wall and froze. Each painting had a name, a story, and a little plaque with the inspiration. On the dinner table, I wrote, "For the times I was invisible, for every you'll never make it, for every time I was told art wasn't work, I was listening." I turned, met their eyes, and smiled, because for once, they were speechless, and I wasn't. My parents didn't say much that night. They walked through the gallery like they didn't know where to look, not at the paintings, not at me, not at each other. Kevin, ever the golden child, tried to laugh it off. "You're so dramatic," he muttered, giving my work a sideways glance. "Is this really how you see us?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him and blinked, slow and quiet, like I was studying a subject I'd already painted and had nothing more to say, because I didn't need to explain myself anymore. The paintings were my answers, and for once, they couldn't talk over me. After the show, I stayed behind to help the gallery staff clean up. It was late, the lights dimmed, and the quiet hum of praise from strangers still echoed in my ears. "Your work is haunting but beautiful. I've never seen family dynamics painted like that before. You made me feel less alone." Not one of those comments came from my family, but I was okay with that. Because validation didn't need to wear my last name. When I got home, I found a message waiting for me. It was from my mom. "We didn't realize you felt that way. You could have just talked to us." I stared at the screen and shook my head, because I had talked to them 100 times. They just never listened. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally learning something I should have learned a long time ago. You can't make someone hear you if their only goal is to silence you. Over the next few weeks, the show gained traction online. Photos of my work started getting shared on social media. People commented things like, "This painting is my childhood. I feel seen in ways I can't explain. Who is this artist? I need more." I gained followers. Commissions started flowing in. A small publisher reached out to ask if I'd be interested in a visual memoir, half paintings, half stories. I said yes. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to remember and help others remember they weren't alone. Then one afternoon, I got a call from my father. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to it. His voice was careful, like he was walking across eggshells. "Saw your interview online. You're doing well. Your mother and I are just surprised. We didn't know you were that serious about art." That serious about art. As if everything I'd ever done wasn't proof enough. As if it was just a phase I'd somehow gotten lucky with. I didn't call back, because there comes a point when the apology is not for you. It's for their own guilt, and I wasn't going to let them use me to ease their discomfort. Instead, I poured everything into my next collection. It was called Portraits of Silence. Each piece featured people mid-sentence, but their mouths were painted over with swirling colors, smoke, flowers, fire, because for so long I hadn't been allowed to speak, and now I had a voice. I even painted one called Sunday Conversations. It showed a girl sitting at a dinner table, surrounded by blurred faces, talking at her, over her, around her, but never to her. At the bottom of the canvas, I painted one word in bold red: enough. That one sold within 2 days. To a woman who told me her daughter had been silenced her whole life. One night, I got a DM from an old classmate, Jessica. She used to sit next to me in high school art class. Always asked to borrow charcoal. Never really took it seriously. Her message said, "Your work is incredible." I showed it to my mom, and she cried. "I didn't know you were carrying all of that." I thought about replying, but instead, I opened my sketchbook and started something new. This one was going to be called The Apology I Never Got. It would show a bouquet of flowers wilting. Each petal had a word on it. "Sorry. We didn't know. You're too sensitive. We love you. It was a joke. Grow up. Get over it." All the words people use to excuse the harm they caused, without ever taking responsibility. And while I was sketching it, something shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry anymore. Not numb. Just art had given me a language that didn't require permission. And in painting the truth, I had painted myself into existence. I wasn't the dramatic daughter anymore. I wasn't the one who left. I was an artist, a storyteller, a survivor, and every brushstroke was my way of reclaiming the narrative. The invitation for the second gallery show came in the spring. It was bigger this time. Downtown. Real critics. Real press. They wanted my new series, Portraits of Silence, and they asked if I'd be willing to speak during the opening. The thought made my stomach knot. Speak out loud? To strangers? I'd gotten used to hiding behind my canvas, letting paint say what I couldn't, but maybe it was time to do both. I spent days preparing, not the speech I knew what I needed to say, but the emotions, the weight, the possible fallout. What if my family saw? What if Kevin showed up again, arms crossed, smirking like I was still 15 and scribbling in the margins of my math homework? What if they heard the truth and finally felt it? The night of the exhibit, I wore black. Not out of mourning, but because it made me feel like armor. Each piece on the wall felt like a scar I had chosen to show, not hide. People walked through slowly, whispering, staring, crying. One woman held her partner's hand tight and said, this was my mother. Another man took a photo of Sunday conversations and whispered, she painted my whole life. And then it was time to speak. The gallery dimmed the lights, a soft spotlight, a small mic. I walked up with shaking hands. My palms were damp, my throat dry. But when I looked out at the crowd, faces turned to me, expectant, respectful. I didn't see enemies. I saw survivors. When I was young, I was told that art was a hobby, that it wasn't real work, that I would fail, that I was wasting time and money and life. And the hardest part, it wasn't strangers who said that. It was people I loved. The room stayed quiet. No shifting, no coughing, just listening. So I kept going. So I painted what I couldn't say. I painted the silence, the loneliness, the dismissal. And with every brushstroke, I took back a piece of myself. After the talk, people came up with tears in their eyes. Some said thank you. Others said me too. And somewhere in the crowd, I saw them. My parents. They had come. They weren't laughing this time. No smirks, no sideways jokes. Just quiet. My mother's arms were folded. My dad looked down at the floor. I didn't walk over. I didn't need their approval anymore. The art wasn't for them. It was about them. Later that night, I checked my phone. A message from Kevin. You really think you're better than us now? No greeting, no punctuation, just bitterness typed in lowercase letters. I stared at it for a while. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel defensive. I just felt done. I didn't answer. I blocked his number. Quietly. Permanently. Because I wasn't interested in going back to where people loved the version of me who stayed small. A week after the show, I got an email from a curator in Chicago. They wanted to feature the dinner table in a traveling exhibit called Unspoken. They called it a masterpiece of emotional clarity. I said yes. I called the exhibit's final piece Forgiveness, eventually. It showed a hand holding a paintbrush. The bristles were dipped in both black and gold. Because healing isn't clean, it's messy. It's grief and growth at the same time. But it's mine. At the very bottom of the canvas, almost invisible, I wrote, sometimes they don't get better. But you do. And I did. The painting that made people cry the most wasn't even my most technical work. It was simple. A girl sitting cross-legged in a corner, her sketch pad open, but every pencil around her was snapped. The title. They said it wouldn't matter anyway. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be, because truth rarely is. People kept asking me during the show, did your family really say that? Was it really that bad? And I'd answer the same every time. It was worse, but they made sure to do it with smiles. Because that's what people don't always understand. Not all pain comes from fists. Some of it comes in quiet dismissals, in sarcasm that cuts deeper than screams, in dinner tables full of conversation, just not with you. When I moved out, I didn't take much, a few clothes, a dented set of brushes, a half-used sketch pad. But what I did take was the one thing they didn't realize they gave me. The drive to prove them wrong. I remembered one moment clearly. Senior year. The guidance counselor had asked me what I planned to do after graduation. I said, art school. She blinked and smiled politely. Then said, have you considered teaching instead? It's more practical. I smiled back, just as politely, and applied to 5 art programs anyway. The thing about being told your dream is foolish is that eventually you start believing it, at least a little. So when the gallery offers came, when the articles got published, when people quoted my words on social media, there was a part of me that still whispered, is this real? Are you sure they're not about to laugh? But no one laughed. Not this time. I once had a professor tell me, "You don't paint with just color, you paint with memory." And I think he was right, because every time someone asked what inspired a piece, I didn't talk about technique. I talked about conversations. Mom saying, "That's not a real degree." Dad saying, "No one pays for pictures." Kevin saying, "Good luck when you're broke." But my favorite moment came at the second show's closing reception. An older woman, white hair, pearls, elegant as a movie star, came up to me and said, "My daughter died 2 years ago. She was an artist too. Your work reminded me of her. Thank you." I didn't know what to say, so I hugged her. And for the first time in my life, I realized art doesn't just save the art, it saves the viewer too. That night, I walked home in silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't need to say it out loud anymore. The world had finally heard me, and yet there was still one piece I hadn't painted. One memory I avoided. The moment I decided to stop showing my family my sketchbook, I was 12. I had drawn something for days, a portrait of all of us, sitting around the fire pit from our family trip. It was my best work. I gave it to my mom. She said, "That's cute, sweetie. Now go help your brother with his science project. That actually matters." So I took that memory and I painted it. I called it The Last Picture I Shared. It showed a girl holding out a picture, her eyes hopeful, but the hands reaching for it were blurred, uninterested, reaching past her. I made the girl's eyes look straight at the viewer, like she was asking, "Do you see me now?" It ended up on the cover of an art magazine, front and center. My name in bold. My dad sent a text the day it came out. "Saw your magazine thing. Guess this whole art thing's working out." I didn't reply, because it wasn't a compliment. It was a confession that they were finally paying attention, but only because the world was. I wasn't interested in their delayed applause. I was building something bigger, a legacy, in color, in shadow, in brushstrokes, that told the truth, whether or not they were ready to hear it. You'd be surprised how many people came up to me after that magazine feature. Neighbors, old classmates, even people I barely spoke to in high school suddenly wanted to grab coffee and catch up. "Wow, you've really made it. I always knew you were talented. Do you remember me? I used to sit behind you in homeroom." It was like I had changed overnight, but I hadn't. They had just started looking. One message, though, hit differently. It was from Ms. Ashford, my high school art teacher. She had been one of the few adults who actually believed in me back then. She'd snuck extra supplies into my backpack when I couldn't afford them. She once told my mom during a parent-teacher conference, "Your daughter has a rare eye, a storyteller's eye." My mom brushed it off at the time, saying, "She just likes to doodle." But now Ms. Ashford messaged me. "I saw your feature. I knew the world would catch up to you eventually. I'm proud of you." I cried. Not the dramatic, chest-heaving kind. Just quiet tears. The kind that come when someone finally says what you've been starving to hear. I thanked her. And then I painted her. It was a soft portrait, watercolor, gentle lines, warm tones. I called it The First One Who Saw Me. That painting never went up in a gallery. I mailed it to her with a handwritten note. A thank you. Because not all stories need to be shouted. Some just need to be remembered. But back to the family. After the second gallery show, and the third, and the magazine, things shifted. They didn't apologize. Not really. But they got quiet. Less teasing, fewer snide texts. A little more silence when I was mentioned at gatherings, I'm told. Almost like they didn't know where they fit in anymore. One night, I got a call from Kevin. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. Finally I answered, if only out of curiosity. His voice was tight, not angry, embarrassed. "Hey, so, my company's putting together a charity fundraiser. They want local artists. I thought maybe you'd want to donate a piece? Donate. No mention of payment. No mention of the thousands my pieces now sold for. Just an assumption I'd be grateful to be included. I asked, are they including the artists in the event, or just displaying their work? I mean, mostly just for show. Background, background. Of course, that's all I'd ever been to them. I said no. He paused. Seriously? It's for a good cause. I told him, then you should pay artists for their labor. Exposure isn't a form of currency anymore. And I hung up. No guilt, no second guessing, just the steady beat of my own worth echoing louder than his voice. That night, I painted something called Background Noise. It was an abstract piece, gray and blue tones, swirling shadows, figures standing in the back, blurred and indistinct. In the middle, one bold red silhouette, alone but visible, and standing tall. It sold for more than Kevin made in a month. That piece was special, but it wasn't the one that caused the biggest stir. That came next. A new series I called Inheritance. It wasn't about money or property. It was about the things we inherit emotionally: doubt, shame, silence, resilience. One painting in that series was simply called Her Voice. It showed a girl reaching for a microphone, but every hand around her tried to push it away, except one. Her own. That one clutched the mic tight. Her mouth was open, not smiling, not polite, just honest. That was the piece the gallery chose for the front of their flyer. It was bold, and as I soon found out, controversial, because it didn't just make people feel, it made some people uncomfortable, especially the ones who recognized themselves in the hands pushing the mic away. That week I got a message from my mother. No greeting, just this. Do you really think we held you back? I stared at it for a long time, typed and deleted 10 responses, then finally sent, I think you never saw me, and when I tried to speak, you made me smaller until I learned how to grow without you. She didn't reply, and I didn't need her to. Somewhere in that silence, I found peace, because growth doesn't require closure. It just requires roots strong enough to survive the storm. And mine, they ran deep, down into every sketch, every failed attempt, every laugh I swallowed, every hour spent painting in that dusty attic. That was my inheritance. Not bitterness, but clarity. I was invited to speak at a university art panel. 3 artists, 1 moderator, an auditorium full of students with bright eyes and sketchbooks in their laps. I stood in front of that crowd, looking into faces that reminded me of who I used to be, hopeful, scared, eager for permission, and I told them the truth. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need a round of applause to keep creating. Sometimes the work you do in silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. They clapped, but it wasn't the clapping that hit me. It was a girl in the front row who raised her hand and said, what if your family never takes you seriously? What if they say you're wasting your life? And I told her gently, then make art they can't ignore. Not for them, for you, because one day they'll come to understand, or they won't. But by then, you'll already be free. After the event, a professor came up to me. She said, you've become a voice for the overlooked. It felt surreal, because I had spent years thinking I was the invisible one. Now I was the mirror. Others used to see themselves. Back home, I was working on a piece titled, The Ones Who Stayed Quiet. It wasn't about my family, not directly. It was about the people who saw the hurt and looked away, who heard the mocking and stayed silent. Because sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't cruelty, it's indifference. It was a heavy painting, muted tones. A girl in the center, surrounded by mouths sewn shut, eyes looking everywhere but at her. When I finished it, I stood back and just stared. Not sad, not angry. Just the gallery put it front and center at their next opening. And that's when my parents showed up again, uninvited. They didn't come to congratulate me. They came to understand why people kept whispering their names in relation to my work. I watched them circle the room slowly, pausing at each piece that mirrored a memory they had dismissed. They stopped at the ones who stayed quiet. My mom said softly, "That's not how it really was." But she didn't say it to me. She said it to the painting. Afterward, she approached. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to hear what she thought she was ready to say. She opened her mouth, then hesitated. "We didn't know it hurt you like that." I tilted my head. "You did. You just didn't care enough to stop." She blinked, taken aback. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was just factual. Because there's a difference between forgiveness and forgetting. And I remembered everything. That night, I painted one final piece for the series. It was called Return to Self. It showed a woman alone in a room, not sad, not desperate, just painting, surrounded by color, by light, by her own quiet power. I painted her features carefully. She had my eyes, but her expression, it belonged to the version of me that survived. That painting didn't go to a gallery, it stayed with me. Because not all art needs an audience. Some of it just needs to remind you who you are. The university panel got posted online. A clip of me saying, "Make art they can't ignore," started circulating. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then I got a message. Then 10. Then hundreds. Aspiring artists. Burnt out adults. People who had abandoned creativity because someone told them it wasn't serious enough. "You made me pick up my brush again." I enrolled in art classes after 10 years. "Your story made me realize I wasn't crazy. I was just unheard." It didn't go viral the way scandals do. It didn't explode. It bloomed, quietly, steadily. And that's when I was invited to speak at the National Creative Resilience Conference. I'd be the closing speaker. Me. The girl who once drew in the margins of her biology book because she couldn't keep her mind caged. I spent weeks preparing for that talk. Not to impress, but to honor the version of me that kept going when everyone else told her to stop. I didn't start my speech with credentials. I didn't quote famous painters or drop stats about gallery sales. I began with this. When I was 14, my brother told me art was a waste of time. When I was 16, my mom said it was cute that I had a hobby, but I should think about something more realistic. When I was 18, I was told good luck starving. And when I was 25, I stood in front of a crowd who called my work brave. I didn't become brave overnight. I became brave because no one else believed I could be. And that was the greatest gift. The applause didn't feel like validation. It felt like a release, like the final crack in a wall I had been chipping away at my whole life. Backstage, a young man came up to me. He looked like he'd been crying. He said, "My dad says painting's a waste, but I want to study it. I've never told anyone." I looked at him and said, "Then you've just told the right person. And I'm telling you now, go do it." He nodded, and I saw it in his eyes. Hope, that dangerous, beautiful spark I once had, and almost lost. A few weeks later, I got an invitation from my old high school. They were hosting an alumni art showcase and wanted me to be the keynote guest. The email came from a new principal. She said, "I've seen your work. The students would be honored to hear from you. Funny, that building once made me feel invisible. Now it had my name on a banner." I accepted. Not out of pride, but to close a chapter. I walked the same halls I used to hide in, past the same lockers where I once heard kids whisper about how weird I was, always doodling, always alone. Now there was a bulletin board with a flyer that said, "Art is not an escape, it's a declaration." Guest speaker Lena Torres. That's me. That's my name. During my speech, I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told the students, some of your families won't understand you. Some of your friends will stop asking about your work. Some of you will question whether it's worth it. but your voice is a thread, and if you keep pulling it, it will lead you somewhere honest. I ended with a small gallery walkthrough of my newest collection, Inheritance Reclaimed. Each piece focused on taking something that once caused shame and painting it into pride. There was a portrait of a girl crying in an attic studio, another of a canvas ripped in half, with the tear stitched shut in gold, a nod to kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the flaw part of the story. Because that's what I had done. I made the flaw the feature, and that's what they remembered. Not just the colors, not just the brushwork, but the story behind each stroke. After the talk, I got a letter from my father. It was typed, which was so like him. He never did learn how to be personal, but it read, "I don't know if it matters now, but I do see it. The talent, the impact. I was wrong. I didn't understand and I didn't try to. I'm sorry." There was no signature. No love, Dad. Just that. I folded it, put it in the back of my journal. Not to treasure, not to forget, just to remind myself that sometimes they do come around. But by the time they do, you'll already be flying. My final gallery show of the year was held in a museum downtown. A retrospective, my entire journey, displayed room by room. The curators worked with me for months. Each section was themed silence. My early work, raw and timid. Resistance, darker, more defiant. Voice, bold color, emotion. The breakthrough years, truth, portraits of the people who told me I'd never make it, reimagined through my eyes. There was one painting that stirred whispers, a large canvas, hung alone, lit just right. It showed a dining table, a girl at one end, 4 adults at the other laughing, plates full. Her plate was empty. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was just watching. I called it What They Fed Me. People stared at that one the longest, some with tears, some with discomfort, a few with guilt, and then there were the familiar faces. My parents came, Kevin came, with his wife. I didn't invite them, but they came anyway. Word travels when there's press. They kept their distance, whispered, pointed, until my mom walked over to that painting. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned to me and said quietly, "You made us the villains." I responded just as calm. "No, I painted what happened. If you recognize yourselves, maybe ask why." She didn't speak after that. She just walked away. I didn't expect them to understand. That show wasn't for them. It was for me. And for everyone who had ever been told that dreams weren't real, that passion didn't pay, that self-expression was indulgent. The museum gave me a private room to display new work-in-progress pieces. That's where I put something deeply personal, a self-portrait, not just of my face, but of everything. Hands covered in paint, eyes steady, hair pulled back in a messy bun, a wall behind me filled with torn critiques, rejection letters, and sketches. I titled it Survivor of Suggestion because I had survived every suggestion they'd made to give up, to do something practical, to settle down, to stop chasing what would never amount to anything. After the show, I was approached by a publisher. They wanted me to write a book, not a how-to, a memoir, the story behind the brushstrokes. At first, I hesitated. I'd already said so much through my work. But then I remembered that girl in the front row, the one who asked if it was okay to keep going when no one believed in her. So I wrote it. The book was called Paint What They Can't See. It hit bestseller lists within weeks. But the best part? Messages from kids, teens, adults who had left art behind, now picking it back up. One girl said she read it while hiding in the school bathroom because her parents didn't support her passion. Another said she gave it to her mom and said, "This is how I feel every day." And the mom cried. My story stopped being just mine. It became a mirror, and I understood something that took me years to realize. They can mock your path. They can doubt your vision. They can call your dream a joke. But they can't erase what you create from your truth. Years from now, someone will see my work and not know the names behind the pain. They won't know Kevin, or my mom, or the counselor who laughed. But they'll know what I felt, and maybe what they feel too. And that's enough, because I didn't just survive the mockery, I turned it into art, and I signed it. Bold, with my name, so they'd never forget who told the story.